It is a Saturday morning in the summer of 1966, and a retired postal worker from Bentonville, Arkansas, is doing his weekly shopping at the local Walmart. He has a tin of coffee in his trolley, a box of nails, a new garden hose. He turns into the sporting goods section and stops so suddenly that the garden hose slides off the front of the trolley and uncoils across the linoleum floor. Behind the counter, hanging on two wooden pegs on the wall between the ammunition shelf and the fishing rod rack, is a Thompson submachine gun. Not a replica, not a display model. The real thing, the blued steel receiver, the distinctive horizontal foregrip, the 20-round box magazine seated firmly in the well, the ventilated barrel jacket that made it look unlike any other weapon ever manufactured. The price card hanging from the trigger guard on a piece of string reads $11.95. He served in the Pacific. He carried one of these through the jungle fighting on New Guinea in 1943 and the assault on Leyte in 1944. He knows the weight of it without picking it up. 4.74 kilograms unloaded, considerably more with a full magazine. He knows the sound it makes at 700 rounds per minute in a confined space. He knows the particular reassurance of having 0.45 ACP stopping power in the moments when stopping power was the only currency that mattered. He puts the garden hose back in the trolley. He picks up the Thompson. He carries it to the counter without looking at the price card again. He already knows he is buying it. What this retired postal worker is holding at the Walmart counter in Bentonville, Arkansas, is the most famous submachine gun in American history. 5 million Thompson submachine guns were built across all variants and all conflicts. They armed gangsters and G-men, paratroopers and OSS agents, Marines and Rangers across every theatre of the Second World War, and they ended up at Walmart for $11.95. This is how. And this is what the law of 1968 did to bring it to its end. The Thompson submachine gun did not begin as a weapon of war. It began as a solution to a problem that its inventor had identified with unusual clarity during the worst years of the Western Front, the problem of the last 30 metres. General John Taliaferro Thompson was an ordnance officer of considerable experience and unconventional thinking, who had watched the casualty figures of the Western Front with the eye of a professional soldier and reached a conclusion that cut through the prevailing tactical debate with uncomfortable directness. The problem of the trenches, Thompson believed, was not primarily one of artillery or manpower or logistics. It was a problem of the final assault, the moment when infantry had to cross the killing ground between opposing trench lines and close with the enemy. In those 30 metres, every existing weapon was inadequate. The bolt-action rifle was too slow to fire and too long to handle in a confined trench. The pistol lacked range and stopping power. The hand grenade was indiscriminate. What was needed was a weapon that one man could carry at a run and fire automatically, delivering enough rounds at close range to clear a trench before the defenders could respond. Thompson called his concept the annihilator. The name was not modest, neither was the man. Working through the Auto Ordnance Corporation, which he founded in New York City in 1916, Thompson assembled a team of engineers to realise his concept. John Blish, a naval officer whose patent on a hesitation lock bolt system formed the basis of the first design, was the primary mechanical contributor. Theodore Eickhoff and Oscar Payne refined the mechanism through the development period that followed. The first functional prototypes were completed in 1919. 2 weeks after the armistice that ended the war, the weapon had been designed to win. The problem Thompson had set himself was genuinely difficult. A weapon light enough for one man to carry at a run needed to be chambered for a cartridge, powerful enough to stop a determined defender at close range. The mechanical challenge of creating a reliable automatic weapon compact enough for trench fighting, robust enough for the conditions of actual combat, and manufacturable in the quantities that a nation at total war would require, had defeated several previous attempts by designers of greater technical sophistication than Thompson. The existing alternatives were each inadequate in specific and documented ways. The Chauchat, supplied to American forces by the French, was notoriously unreliable in conditions of mud and cold. Its open-sided magazine, admitting the debris of the Western Front, with results that veterans described in terms that were unprintable in official reports. The Bergmann MP-18, the German weapon that had pioneered the submachine gun concept in 1918, was simply unavailable to American forces. The Lewis gun, excellent in its own right, was too heavy and too complex for the close assault role Thompson envisaged. The requirement for .45 ACP caliber was non-negotiable in Thompson's mind. The Philippine experience of 1899 to 1902, in which American soldiers had discovered that the .38 long Colt revolver was inadequate for stopping determined attackers at close range, had produced the .45 ACP cartridge specifically to address that deficiency. Thompson had lived through that institutional memory. He was not going to design a weapon in a caliber that he knew from documented experience to be insufficient. The mechanism that Auto Ordnance Corporation's engineers finalized for the first production Thompson, the Model 1921, was a delayed blowback design using John Blish's hesitation lock principle, in which a bronze H-piece in the bolt assembly was intended to delay the bolt opening by adhesion to the inclined surfaces of the receiver until chamber pressure had dropped to safe levels. Later analysis would suggest that the Blish principle was mechanically unnecessary at the pressure levels of the .45 ACP cartridge, that the Thompson would have functioned reliably as a simple blowback design without the bronze H-piece. But the principle had been incorporated on the basis of Blish's patent and remained through the inertia of established tooling and the conservatism of manufacturers who preferred not to modify a working design. The resulting weapon was magnificent and expensive. The Model 1921. Thompson measured 85.6 centimetres, with the fixed wooden stock, weighed 4.74 kilograms unloaded, and fired the .45 ACP cartridge from either a 20-round box magazine or the iconic 50-round drum. The cuts compensator on the muzzle reducing felt recoil by redirecting propellant gas upward against a series of slots machined into its surface, effectively countering the weapon's tendency to climb during automatic fire. The cyclic rate was approximately 800 rounds per minute in early variants, fast enough to empty a 20-round magazine in less than 2 seconds. The manufacturing cost was approximately $209 per weapon in 1921, a figure equivalent to roughly $3,500 today, reflecting the precision machining that every component of the early Thompson required. Colt's patent firearms manufacturing company in Hartford, Connecticut, manufactured the first commercial production run under license from Auto Ordnance. The weapon's initial commercial reception was mixed. American law enforcement agencies purchased modest quantities, and the Irish Republican Army acquired examples through commercial channels in the early 1920s. But the weapon's most enthusiastic early customers were the criminal organizations of Prohibition-era America, whose requirements for a compact, powerful automatic weapon that could be carried in a violin case were met by the Thompson, with a precision that its inventor had not anticipated and could not entirely disavow. The Second World War transformed the Thompson's commercial failure into industrial necessity. The M1928A1 variant, the standard Thompson of the early war years, retained the Blish bolt and the drum magazine capability, but had been modified with a horizontal foregrip, replacing the pistol grip forend and a simplified rear sight. Manufactured primarily by Savage Arms Company in Utica, New York, and by Auto Ordnance's own Bridgeport, Connecticut facility, the M1928AE had one cost approximately $209 per weapon, still ruinously expensive for wartime mass production. The Army's response was the M1 Thompson of 1942, which eliminated the Blish bolt in favour of a simple blowback design, removed the barrel cooling fins, replaced the horizontal foregrip with a plain wooden stock, and restricted magazine compatibility to the 20-round and 30-round box magazines. The M1A1 further simplified the design by machining the firing pin directly into the bolt face, eliminating a separate component. The cost fell from $209 to approximately $45 per weapon, a reduction achieved through the kind of ruthless simplification that wartime production demanded and peacetime manufacturing pride resisted. Savage Arms in Utica became the dominant wartime producer. Total production of the Thompson, in all variants between 1940 and 1945, reached approximately 1.75 million weapons from American factories, with additional production under license in Australia and elsewhere. The 5 million figure cited in accounts of the Walmart surplus trade encompasses production across both world wars, interwar commercial manufacture, postwar exports and military assistance programs, and licensed overseas production. A figure whose complete documentation requires examination of records distributed across multiple archives and multiple countries, though the broad scale of production across all these sources is not disputed by serious historians of the period. In combat, the Thompson occupied a tactical niche that no other Allied weapon quite filled. The extreme close-quarters fighting role, where accuracy at range was irrelevant and volume of .45 ACP fire at distances under 50 metres was the only thing that mattered. On Guadalcanal, in August 1942, Marine raiders armed with Thompsons conducted the night fighting in the jungle that characterised the first months of the campaign, with the weapon's stopping power proving decisive in the close-quarters encounters that jungle darkness produced. Japanese soldiers who survived contact with Thompson-armed Marines described in captured documents the psychological impact of the weapon's sound and the physical impact of its cartridge, the .45 ACP, delivering energy at close range, that the Japanese military's standard 6.5mm and 7.7mm rifle cartridges could not match in the intimate violence of jungle fighting. On the night of June 5, 1944, paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions carrying Thompsons dropped into Normandy in the darkness before the D-Day landings. Officers and NCOs preferred the Thompson's combat dimensions and close-range power to the longer M1 Garand for the night fighting in the Norman hedgerows that followed the drop. The weapon's shorter overall length making it more manageable in the dense bocage vegetation that channeled movement and reduced combat ranges to distances where the Thompson's .45A CP cartridge was at its most effective. OSS operatives inserted into occupied France, the Netherlands, Norway and Yugoslavia carried Thompsons on missions whose operational details remain partially classified, though accounts from surviving agents consistently describe the weapon as the preferred choice for urban operations where discretion and close-range effectiveness were simultaneously required. The Thompson's reputation, its cultural weight as the weapon of American determination, carried a psychological dimension in the occupied territories that more anonymous weapons could not replicate. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The comparative record of the Thompson against its contemporaries reveals both its genuine strengths and the cost that those strengths imposed. The German MP-40, the standard German submachine gun of the Second World War, represented the direct philosophical alternative to the Thompson's approach, where the Thompson used the heavy .45 ACP cartridge in a weapon of considerable mechanical complexity and manufacturing expense. The MP-40 used the 9mm parabellum cartridge in a weapon of stamped steel construction that could be produced in a fraction of the time and at a fraction of the cost. The MP-40 weighed 3.97 kilograms unloaded, 3/4 of a kilogram lighter than the Thompson, and fired from a 32-round straight-box magazine at approximately 500 rounds per minute, a slower cyclic rate than the Thompson's 700, but one that made ammunition management somewhat more practical in sustained combat. The caliber comparison between the Thompson's .45 ACP and the MP-40's 9mm parabellum encapsulates a genuine tactical disagreement that military historians have examined at considerable length without reaching consensus. The .45 ACP bullet, at 14.9 grams, is approximately twice the mass of the 9mm parabellum at 7.45 to 8 grams, and delivers its energy at lower velocity in a manner that produces a wound channel of greater immediate diameter at close ranges. German ordnance officers examining captured Thompsons consistently expressed professional respect for the weapon's close-range effectiveness, though German tactical doctrine rated the submachine gun as secondary to the squad machine gun as a source of automatic fire support regardless of caliber. The Soviet PPSH-41 was produced in quantities exceeding 6 million and represented the most comprehensive deployment of the submachine gun concept of the entire war. Entire Red Army formations were equipped with the PPSH-41 as their standard weapon rather than treating it as a specialist arm. Its 71-round drum magazine gave it a capacity advantage over the Thompson's 50-round drum, and its 7.62mm Tokarev cartridge, whilst lighter than the .45 ACP, was fired at higher velocity and from a larger magazine capacity. Its production cost was a fraction of the Thompson's. The PSH-41's stamped steel and wood construction required minimal precision machining, and its cyclic rate of approximately 900 rounds per minute was higher than either the Thompson or the MP40. The British Sten gun, produced at approximately 10 shillings per weapon, represented the extreme economy end of the Allied submachine gun spectrum. Its stamped sheet metal construction required no precision machining and could be produced in improvised workshops across Britain and the occupied territories. Its 9mm parabellum caliber and 32-round box magazine gave it adequate close-range effectiveness, and its simplicity of manufacture made it ideal for clandestine production and supply to resistance networks. It was, by universal acknowledgement among soldiers who carried it, an ugly and occasionally unreliable weapon that inspired none of the affection that the Thompson consistently generated. The post-war surplus of Thompson submachine guns followed the established pattern of American military surplus disposal, from frontline service to reserve storage to the commercial channels that characterized post-war American consumer culture. Walmart, Sam Walton's remarkable retail creation, which had opened its first store in Rogers, Arkansas on July 2nd, 1962, and was by 1966 already expanding through the small towns and rural communities of the American South and Midwest, became one of the natural retail outlets for the surplus Thompson trade. Walton's fundamental insight that ordinary working Americans deserved access to quality goods at prices that reflected genuine value rather than retail tradition, applied with equal commercial logic to surplus military submachine guns as to everything else on his shelves. The $11.95 price point for a Thompson at Walmart was extraordinary by any measure. The weapon, whose manufacture had cost approximately $45 in its wartime simplified form, and $209 in its original precision machined version, was available for $11.95 to any customer who walked in on a Saturday morning. The transactions that followed were, by every contemporary account, entirely unremarkable. Veterans bought them with the particular satisfaction of men reacquiring something they had carried into the worst experiences of their lives. Collectors bought them because they understood that the Thompson was historic in a way that transcended its military service, a cultural icon whose presence in American popular mythology extended from the St. Valentine's Day massacre of 1929 to the hedgerows of Normandy. Hunters and sport shooters bought them because a .45 ACP submachine gun at $11.95 was simply extraordinary value by any calculation. The Gun Control Act that President Lyndon Johnson signed into law on October 22, 1968, ended the Walmart Thompson counter as definitively as the armistice of 1918 had ended the trench warfare that John Thompson had designed his annihilator to win. The price cards came down, the surplus pipeline closed. The weapons already sold remained exactly where they were, legally owned, legally kept, grandfathered under the National Firearms Act registry, whose closure to new entries by the Hughes Amendment of 1986 would eventually make them among the most valuable automatic weapons in private hands. A registered transferable Thompson M, 1A1 on today's collector market, commands between $20,000 and $35,000 for standard examples, with original M 1928A1 variants in excellent condition reaching considerably higher. The $11.95 Walmart purchase has become, through the simple arithmetic of federal legislation and 6 decades of collecting, one of the most inadvertently consequential transactions in the history of American retail. Return to that Saturday morning in Bentonville, Arkansas. Return to the retired postal worker standing at the Walmart counter with his tin of coffee and his box of nails and his garden hose. He has found something extraordinary between the fishing rods and the ammunition shelf. He already knows he is buying it before he looks at the price. $11.95. 5 million Thompson submachine guns were built to arm a nation across 2 world wars. They armed gangsters and G-men before the first shot of the Second World War was fired. They crossed every ocean and cleared every jungle and dropped into every darkness that the war produced. They ended up at Walmart for $11.95, and then the law changed and the price cards came down, and the most famous submachine gun in American history became something that no one would ever again find between the garden hoses and the fishing rods. John Thompson called his weapon the Annihilator. He designed it to clear trenches. He could not have imagined a Walmart sporting goods counter. But then he built something so famous that even the man selling it for $11.95 knew exactly what it was. Everyone always knew what a Tommy gun was. Walmart knew. The postal worker knew. They still do.